My name is Tracy Stone Manning. I'm the director of the Clark Fork Coalition and have been asked by Vicki to be the Mistress of Ceremonies this evening. And as I was walking to the room, I thought to myself, you know, the mistress is really supposed to be better dressed than this. I went on the tour today and then did a lovely 5 o'clock meeting and thought that I'd get home in time. It didn't. So my apologies. But again, welcome to what is now the 5th Clark Fork Symposium. This event began in 1985 and has gathered every 5 years since then. And, you know, we have made so much progress in 20 years, both scientifically and politically. In 1985, the Clark Fork River had just been added to the nation's list of Superfund sites. We understood there was a problem, but we had no real idea of the breadth of that problem, the risks it posed, or the steps available to fix it. In 1985, the word watershed was for wonks. And today, watershed groups have sprung up all over the Clark Fork Basin, indeed all over the nation. Watershed restoration has become not only a worthy goal, but an organizing force, bringing ranchers, government agencies, educators, conservationists, and citizens together to hash out both common goals and common agendas. But you know, this is all more than feel-good stuff, especially in the Clark Fork. By my back-of-the-envelope calculation, over $1 billion, that's $1 billion, will be spent on cleanup and restoration and mitigation activities in the Clark Fork from its headwaters in Butte to where the river flows into Lake Pend Oreille. That number can lead to transformative change. It's also a real signal that society's values today are evolving. We know now enough to make amends. The question that looms, and really should loom, is whether we know how. And I expect you'll hear quite a bit about that in the next couple days. What I find interesting, though, and at odds in today's world, is that society's values have evolved. We do make a commitment to and fund restoration. And at the very same time, we continue to permit operations that pollute unacceptably. One need only look to just last Sunday's New York Times, which reported on Newmont. It's a Denver-based mining company. In Indonesia, Newmont has dumped over 5 million tons of mining waste polluted with mercury and arsenic in a bay that is a source of people's food and ultimately some of their drinking water. The company denies that sicknesses and also a child's death are in any way related. And this is actually simply, in today's society, unacceptable behavior from an American company which has both the financial and the intellectual resources, because it is an American company, to behave in this way. It can and do better. Closer to home, while we spend nearly $1 billion restoring the Clark Fork, government agencies have also permitted the building of the Rock Creek Mine on the lower Clark Fork, which, if it's ever built, would dump 3 million of wastewater per day into the Clark Fork forever. Don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing permitting processes in Indonesia to permitting processes in America. My point being that we have come so far culturally with saying that restoration is important. And we've come so far into the understanding of the science of restoration and the cultural need for it, yet we lag on in finding ways to live on the planet without making the pollution in the first place. That's a charge for the scientific community, as well as the political community. And because I'm an optimist, that's a charge I believe that symposiums like this will take up and heed. So while we celebrate our gains, especially our restoration gains, over the next 2 days, and we absolutely should celebrate those things, let's take heed to the challenges before us. So, without further ado, to kick off the next 2 days, let me introduce tonight's panelists. I think rather than popping up and down, I'll let you know what's in store for you, and our panelists can come up and speak for themselves. So kicking off our evening is Vicki Watson, who really deserves both your recognition and your applause, because in 1985, she's the one who started this, and by God, she's the one who continues to do this and take on an amount of details that you cannot possibly believe. Those of us who are in any way involved with the symposia understand the amount of emails that have hit our inbox with the most minutiae of details that none of us would have thought about, but Vicki has. So first of all, Vicki, before I introduce her, let us thank you. to and made her home the Clark Fork Basin more than 2 decades ago. And ever since, she's worked with her community to restore and protect the basin and its waters. She teaches and learns environmental science at the university here in Montana. With her students, she runs the Watershed Health Clinic, which matches UM's students and staff with community groups working to conserve their watersheds. She has a doctorate in aquatic ecology from the University of Wisconsin, and I'm certain probably nearly everybody in this room is some way or other tangentially touched to Vicki, and we all thank her for that. Following Vicki will be Christine Brick. Chris is a riverine geochemist who holds her PhD from the University of Montana in geology. She teaches part-time at the university, and I'm quite happy to tell you she's also the staff scientist at the Clark Fork Coalition. She's an avid climber and outdoorswoman. Diane Williams is the executive director of the Tri-State Water Quality Council, which was formed back in 1993. They're headquartered in Sandpoint, Idaho, which she told us is the center of the watershed. We, of course, in Missoula love to believe we are the center of the watershed, but in fact, it's Sandpoint. Diane's been working on the Clark Fork and its issues for nearly 15 years. Mark Holston is the Public Information Officer of the Flathead Basin Commission, and he's been working there for 15 years. Kathy Coleman is a program specialist with the Natural Resource Damage Program and has been with that program since 1991. So if you add up the wealth of information that is about to hit you this evening, it's 30, 45, 65 years worth of work on the Clark Fork River. So I welcome them. Vicki, you're first. Oh.
Quick adjustment for the vertically challenged. And thanks for the introduction there, Tracy. And I do want to make one little correction, and that is I was a speaker at the first symposium, but not an organizer. And that one of the organizers was Lauren Balls, who is also a sponsor of tonight's symposium. I went and grabbed the sponsorship list, but realized that it would take my whole time to talk, to read off the names of everyone who's contributed in some way. So it's out front on the registration table. It's also on the website for those of you who'd like to see some of the many generous people who have either given time or money to help bring the symposium to you. And as you can see through the miracle of information technology, we were able to bring you these blurry images of the basin. And I'm going to, if I can make this work right, you know what? I pressed the little arrow and nothing has happened. Okay. All right, so I'm going to try to give a State of the Basin report. I did this the first time at the 2000 symposium, so you'll see a few comparisons between the State of the Basin in 2000 and in 2005. And what do I mean by a State of the Basin report? I think that when we take stock of the condition of the basin, we first consider the condition as we find it. Are we achieving our goals for the basin? And our goals include both ecological goals and legal goals. Hopefully the legal goals are based on our ecological goals. Speaking ecologically, we usually say that our goals for the basin is that it have the most natural flows possible, that it have healthy riparian areas and healthy fisheries. We have often more specific numerical water quality goals. Certainly we want the levels of metals and nutrients and algae to be such that the beneficial uses of the water are supported. Beneficial uses including the support of aquatic life in cold water fisheries, the support of contact recreation, support of drinking water, agricultural and industrial uses are some of the uses that we like to support. And that's what we mean by our legal goals. Our legal goals are that we will achieve a level of water quality that supports all these beneficial uses. And I always like to point out that water quality is more than just the chemistry of the water. Water quality includes also habitat quality. It's very important. So we try to assess the current condition, and then we look at trends. Are those conditions getting better or getting worse? This is always very challenging because the natural variability in river ecosystems is so great that it's very hard to distinguish a distinct upward or downward trend from all the just natural noise in the system. And finally, we consider, well, not quite finally, we also consider the actions we're taking. What are we doing to try to achieve those goals? What kinds of actions are we taking? And this year I added in challenges. We have to consider that we're facing some really tough challenges in terms of trying to achieve our goals in the basin. And amongst those challenges are very rapid population growth and a pattern of development that is sometimes called sprawl, sometimes called low-density development, and I think Chris is probably going to say more about that. And another challenge we've been facing is drought, a very long, prolonged drought that not only makes, it's very stressful to the river and its inhabitants, but also produces fires, and fires are emergency situations that absorb our time and our interest and our resources, and we can't get back to the long, slow, careful, thoughtful process of watershed planning and conservation work because we're always fighting these emergency situations. So this little animation I pulled off the internet, and it shows the projected growth, the recent growth and projected growth in Montana. And you'll see not a whole lot of growth is mainly showing up on here in the form of more, now, I was told not to point at the screen, but instead to point up here so that you'd see what I was pointing at. The growth that we're really most concerned about is in yellow on here. It's very, very low density growth, 1 unit per 10 to 40 acres. And this too fast moving animation starts out in 1960 and then shows how much that yellow area has expanded by 1990, and then goes ahead and projects that out into the year 2020 and 2050. And so you see what looks like some sort of yellow growth growing over the basin, particularly, and a lot of that growth is here in western Montana, and you see it particularly along the river basins, along the Blackfoot, along the Bitterroot, up in the Flathead, very rapid growth. You notice it's not projecting near as much growth along the upper Clark Fork, and that's because it's just projecting historical patterns. And historically, there's not been very rapid growth along the upper Clark Fork. It's considered not to be that desirable a place to live. But of course, that's likely to change in the near future. So here's this sprawling low-density growth is a big challenge that we're facing. And I stole this off of John LaFave's presentation, which he'll be giving tomorrow. He shows the increase in wells, another sort of indicator of growth, these private wells that are being put in, many of these private wells are being put in these low-density development areas, and we see, as John points out, that 50% of the wells that have ever been drilled have been drilled in the last 15 years, and that's a pretty rapid rate of growth. I mentioned the drought. This shows the average annual flows in the Clark Fork above Missoula going back to 1930. And in the 1930s, we were in the famous Dust Bowl drought. And notice that the average annual flows, and this just take all the daily flows and average them out, the average annual flows above Missoula stayed below 3,000 CFS. And then we had the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, where we had some pretty good flows. The average flows were often above 3,000 CFS. And then starting in kind of the early 1980s, we've got, except for a couple of exceptional years, 76 and 77, we've had a long period of time below 3,000 CFS again. So we're seeing a drought that is, and many of the soil scientists and other scientists say the same thing. We're seeing a drought that is of the magnitude of the Great Dust Bowl drought. That's a very tough, it's very hard on the river. And it doesn't look good for this coming year. The projected stream, the current stream flows, according to the USGS, the categories that are on here are above average in blue, average in green, below average in yellow, and way below average in red. And you can see we've got a lot of yellow and red dots in the Clark Fork Basin. So we're currently way below average or way below average for much of our flows. And the U.S. Drought Monitor that you can find on the internet also shows much of western Montana in extreme drought or exceptional drought. I'm not sure what's the difference between extreme and exceptional, but it's dry out there, as we all know. And what do you get when you have drought in our area? You get fires. We had a lot of fires in 2000. This shows the cumulative burn in 2000. It's burned a lot of the Bitterroot and then other scattered fires around the basin. And in 2003, also cumulative burn map for 2003, and 2000 and 2003 were the two big fire years in Montana. Certainly we've had some other big years as well, but those were the two big ones. A lot of them up in the Flathead, a lot of fires up in the Flathead. So, and once again, what's the projection for this year? 2005 is the fire potential is above normal for Montana. Look at us, lucky us up there, that above normal fire potential. So fire, again, this emergency situation that drains our resources, and you know, we're always battling this emergency as opposed to trying to focus on calm, considered watershed planning and conservation process. But I'll now, after talking about challenges, I'll talk a little bit about condition and trends in the basin. I went to two databases that are maintained by state agencies. One of those databases is maintained by the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They have a big database they call MFISH, Montana Fisheries Information System, Hallelujah, I think is what the H stands for. And they score the quality of the fishery all around the basin. And in 2000, if you look down here, in 2000, 56% of the stream miles in the basin scored high or excellent, and 31% scored medium and 12% low. In 2005, I went back to the same database, pulled out the same information and summarized it, and the stream miles in the basin were scoring a little better. But this amount of change as to whether or not that is a statistically significantly meaningful change or not, either it's held the same or it may have improved slightly according to the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks fishery scoring of just the condition of the fisheries. Another database that's maintained by the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, it summarizes all the information they have on their water quality assessments. In 2000, I can find a point up here. In 2000, they, based on their water quality assessments, 80% of the stream miles in the basin were impaired. That is, not fully supporting all of their beneficial uses. Only 7% were considered to fully support beneficial uses, and 13% had insufficient data to determine whether they did or not. And that doesn't sound very good. In 2005, it looks like the situation has changed dramatically, but it turns out that much of this change is actually due to some changed legal definitions about, one, what is impaired, and two, what constitutes sufficient data to determine whether a stream is impaired or not. So we see a lot of that 80% impaired. Some of that has gone down into the is now considered to be fully supporting, and some of that is now been added to the category of insufficient data. Once again, in the interim, there was a change in the definition of what is sufficient credible data to make a determination, so that's why so much of this moved into this insufficient data category. And there was also, it became more difficult to determine that a stream was impaired. You had to have sort of a higher level of proof, if you will, to determine that a stream was impaired. I like to think that there has been a little bit of improvement, but I think that most of the change you're looking at there is just a change in legal definitions of impairment and sufficient data. The uses that are impaired for the most part are the support of aquatic life, including the cold water fishery, drinking, and contact recreation. These are the uses that are most often impaired. For the most part, agriculture and industrial uses are supported. The causes that are most often designated as causing the impairment in both 2000 and 2005, the leading cause was always habitat alteration, not some traditional pollutant going into the water, but altering the habitat by either channelizing the stream or rip-rapping the banks or cutting down the trees along the side of the stream. Habitat alteration. Flow alteration is also important. Flow alteration would include dewatering or altering flows through damming or something of that sort. So these are not what we think of when we think of pollution usually. Some people call it physical pollution. It's changing the physical habitat, and that more often interferes with supporting aquatic life and a cold water fishery than the traditional pollutants do. But we do see some of the traditional pollutants down there. Silt, metals, and nutrients are the pollutants that were most often listed as causing impairment. The sources of impairment that are listed most often are resource extraction, kind of a vague term. I assume it includes mining, but apparently not agriculture or silviculture, because those are listed separately, also being important. So agriculture, silviculture, hydromodification, and a growing concern is construction. Construction of roads, construction of buildings in the floodplain, and so on. So this gives you an idea of kind of what the basin was assessed to be, and of course with all the limitations of our ability to collect information and the definitions we're using for impairment. You see a lot of red, that's the impaired stream miles. The blue is the fully supporting stream miles, and the black are the insufficient data miles. The update of that map, which was just drawn for me very kindly by Jerry Dahlmiller of the Montana State Library, we now have more categories, so the picture's gotten a little more complicated. The old map just had red for impaired, blue for happy and fully supporting, and black for we don't know. We've now got a bunch of different categories. You can see them listed over here. We have two categories of supporting, and one of them is we have checked all of the uses and we have determined that they are all supported. Another one is we have checked some of the uses and they are supported, but we haven't checked the others yet. So it's a little paler blue up there. We still have our insufficient data category, and it's still in black. And then we have three categories of impaired streams. Impaired streams include those that are impaired and do not yet have a water quality restoration plan. And the Clean Water Act requires that if a stream is impaired or if any water body is impaired, the state must develop for it in a timely fashion a water quality restoration plan, which is called TMDL for reasons I won't go into. So think of it as a water quality restoration plan. And so a very small number of those have been completed. They show, most of the streams that are impaired still need a water quality restoration plan. So they are shown in red on here. A small number, a very small number in purple up there, have had their restoration plan completed and it's approved and we're now ready to start implementing it. And then the ones in green is a new interesting category. They are impaired, but they are not impaired by pollutants like metals, nutrients, silt. Instead, they are impaired by habitat alteration or flow alteration. And it was an interesting legal interpretation, and not one that I would have made if I were the judge, but the interpretation was made that that was not what the Clean Water Act was talking about when it required these water quality restoration plans that are called TMDLs. And so it was decided that those are a lower priority. They're not required to have a water quality restoration plan. We will eventually do water quality restoration plans for them when we get around to it. But for now, we're concentrating on these. And so that's, you can see that the basin, especially this part of the basin, has a lot of those impaired streams that still need water quality plans. We see a little scattering of green ones that are impaired, but apparently not by pollutants, so they don't require one. And then we see a very small number that have actually had TMDLs, or water quality plans, completed on them. And you can see those water quality plans a little bit better on this map, and I'm going to back up here and make sure that that's not the right thing to touch. Just to help you see what the Clark Fork Basin looks like in Montana, I always say that it's a little fat guy who's kind of jogging towards Idaho. There's his head, and there's his hand pointing towards Idaho, and there's one foot, and there's the other foot, and there's his fat little rear end. So it's a little fat guy who's kind of jogging toward Idaho, and that helps you to see him when the basin is not outlined, because there's the Kootenai system up here, and so just so that to help you see him a little better on the next slide, because on the next slide he's not outlined. So there's the hand, there's the head, there's the back, there's the little feet of the little Clark Fork Basin jogging towards Idaho. And the completed water quality restoration plans are shown in bright blue. And so one has been done for the upper Clark Fork, but it's just for nutrients. It doesn't address all the problems of the upper Clark Fork, obviously. So we have completed a water quality plan, and we are implementing that water quality plan for nutrients for the upper Clark Fork. And then there are a few others, the upper Blackfoot, upper Lolo Creek. Here's one that says, if I had my glasses on, Flathead Lake and the Swan. And just a couple of other scattered ones here and there. I think it's Elk Creek around the basin. And those were completed earlier. And the ones that are in gray, this map was drawn in 2004. So the ones that are in gray have been completed and are going through the approval process right now. Some of them have, in fact, already been approved, and some will be approved almost immediately. And then these other color codings, pink for 2005, yellow for 2006, green for 2007, that's when those water quality restoration plans are supposed to be done. And an awful lot of the basin, especially an awful lot of the upper Clark Fork, it's sometime after 2008 is when those water quality plans will be done. And an important thing to say about these plans is they are plans. They don't fix the problem yet. The stream is still impaired. And the DEQ currently has its hands pretty full just developing these plans. Once they develop the plan and approve it, in a few cases, they begin to work very actively with the local community to begin to implement the plans. In some cases, they kind of leave it up to the local community. Will you guys kind of take this on and start running with the ball and get some things done on this? And we'll check back in 5 or 10 years to see how you're doing, to see if you're meeting your goals. So plans are getting done. It's going to take until 2012 to even complete all the plans, and certainly in terms of implementing those plans, we're talking decades and decades. I just want to mention another important plan, and I've kind of transitioned from talking about trends and conditions to talking about actions now. And plans are important actions, but you mustn't stop with plans. You must go on to on-the-ground actions. But another important planning process that is going on is all those national forests that make up such a large part of the Clark Fork Basin. They're all way overdue to redo their forest plans. And the Flathead, Lolo, and Bitterroot forest, which make up so much of our little fat running man here, was one of the forests, and there's another forest, and there's another forest. Those 3 forests make up an awful lot of the basin. They are developing their forest plans together, and they were a draft EIS was due out this spring, but something has come down from the federal administration saying we're proposing some new rules and say that you don't have to do an EIS with a forest plan. And so our local forests are currently trying to decide, well, will we stop this EIS process and go to the new rules? and just do a forest plan without an EIS or not. And that's what they're deciding right at the moment. I have looked at some of the scoping documents on those plans. You know, what has the Forest Service and the public that they've consulted, what kind of issues are they saying should be covered in those plans? And I was surprised at how seldom the word watershed came up. I'm used to looking at all sorts of documents where there's watershed liberally sprinkled through the table of contents. Watershed did not appear in the table of contents of any of the scoping documents and issues documents that have come out of this planning process so far. So as I plowed down through said, oh, you're not going to make this easy for me. It's not in the table of contents. I'll have to go looking for it. And found, to my surprise, very little reference about watersheds, except some statements about we need to do more active restoration of watersheds and we need to collaborate on TMDLs. And indeed, the Forest Service has been collaborating with DEQ and working hard on these water quality restoration plans. So stay tuned on that one. So important actions for watershed CPR or conservation, preservation, restoration include these plans like the TMDLs and the forest plans. They also include forming partnerships to get the work done. You're going to hear about an example of a big partnership here tonight that's made up of all these various groups. But those plans and partnerships have to be translated into on-the-ground actions. And when it comes to on-the-ground actions, a lot of the talks tomorrow are about such on-the-ground actions. We had a great field trip today where we saw a lot of those on-the-ground actions. A lot of the talks tomorrow present and evaluate those on-the-ground actions. And the field trip on Saturday is looking at some projects here on Missoula's streams. On-the-ground actions, and probably the Cadillac of on-the-ground actions is the Blackfoot River Basin and the this is just a summit of public and private partnerships carrying out on-the-ground actions. One of my favorite websites is this great website. It's a Partners for Wildlife website that shows just some of the projects going on the Blackfoot. You go to that website and you can click on any of these projects and get a great description of the project, see before and after the project was taking place. And a lot of these are fisheries habitat restoration processes, and they are, you know, the Blackfoot is really being greatly enhanced by these efforts. You'll see some talks about some of these, like the Nevada Creek and Nevada Spring Creek projects. These are some before and after pictures on those projects, and there are talks in the sessions about these. And some of the other types of projects going on up there, everything from water leasing, lining irrigation canals so they don't lose so much water, building fish ladders around dams and other barriers, removing or upgrading culverts, putting in off-stream watering, fish screens, all these kinds of projects to help out the fisheries. Another big transforming on-the-ground action is taking place up the Clark Fork, where the moonscapes of Silverbow Creek and the upper Clark Fork are being transformed into a healthy river system. In addition to healing the river and the land, it's doing a lot for the community as well. The restoration work going on up there is bringing a lot of jobs to an area that badly needed jobs. So that work is healing the land and the community by going beyond remediation to restoration. And this is something that I think Montana, I hope, is leading all the rest of the country on. At Superfund sites, we won't just clean up, we won't just do what Superfund requires, but we'll take the extra step, we'll go through this natural resource damage process, obtain additional funds from the poor old responsible party, and go beyond remediation to restoration, to not just cleaning up contamination, but actually correcting some of our past errors in terms of habitat alteration, channelization and dewatering and so on and so forth. So this is pictures of one part of Silverbow Creek, which has undergone this remediation and restoration process, and this is after about 2 or 3 years of the area growing back, an area that formerly looked like some of these moonscapes that you see here. And that idea of going beyond remediation to restoration has been carried on down the river to a really watershed decision, to use the expression, of removing the dam and restoring the confluence of Milltown. You're going to hear a lot about that tomorrow as well. We've also been taking actions to reduce nutrients. That I mentioned the big nutrient reduction plan on the Clark Fork. Missoula has built a state-of-the-art, or rather upgraded its wastewater plant to a state-of-the-art biological nutrient removal plant. Butte and Deer Lodge land apply some of their wastewater. The pulp mill has changed the way it treats its wastewater so as to reduce the amount of nutrients that it puts out. So there's been a lot of effort in reducing nutrients. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about these tables other than to say we do quantitatively assess the impacts of those actions. We are able to evaluate the extent to which the river is now attaining targets for our desirable levels for nutrients and for algae. And we are, I'll talk in a moment about trends. We've got a long way to go in that there's still quite a lot. This is the percent of samples that attain targets. And you can see I'm pointing at this again instead of this. As you go down the river, the river's less impacted by nutrients, and it attains targets a greater percentage of the time. The biggest problems are up the river. And trend-wise, we've also been evaluating trends over many years, and there is a talk, and I do want to plug the talks that are right at the end of the day on Friday. We couldn't fit everybody into the morning, and then we have this great poster session in the early afternoon when everybody's too sleepy to sit and listen to talks or walk around and look at posters. There are a few papers I couldn't fit into the morning session, and so they are right at the end of the day, and they are, I claim, 3 of the best papers. So I hope that you will, those of you who can, will stay to hear them. And one of them is looking at 20 years of nutrient data on the Clark Fork and determining whether or not all these efforts have improved the situation. And what you're going to find out, I'm trying not to steal his thunder too much, is that for many nutrients we've seen significant reductions. That's what the negative signs are. But unfortunately, for a really key nutrient, soluble nitrogen, we've seen either no change or an increase. And when it comes to algae, we've also seen no change or an increase. I think much of that is due to the fact that we've done this assessment over a period of times where early on we had high flows, and then later on in the assessment process we had low flows, simply less scour to scour the algae away, and less water to dilute that the soluble nitrogen that comes in mainly as groundwater. So something that you find out when you look at long-term trends is, once again, the natural variability in the environment tends to obscure the effects of your actions and makes it hard to see both trends that are getting worse and trends that are getting better. But I think more research is needed. That with more time, when we can sort of sort out the variability of the environment, I think we'll begin to see these improving trends that will. And the good news, Tracy already mentioned this, we've got some very good news, and that is that Montanans, and along with help from a lot of other people, are making some major investments in restoration in the basin. That we have got a poster on some of the dam mitigation work being done by Avista in connection with the lower river reservoirs. I've got, there's a mention of the amount of money spent on nutrient reduction, on resource restoration, that's the NRDP program, Superfund, and these numbers are probably out of date. These numbers are actually from the 2000 symposium, and I haven't been able to find updates of them yet. The total then was already over $1 billion, and some of these certainly were projected into the future as well. But it doesn't even include all the money being spent by the Forest Service, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service, DEQ, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, all those programs that they are bringing to bear on the river, and the many groups and private landowners, for instance, who are also spending their money. So that's the good news, is we're making these major investments, and the even better news is that the river will do most of the work itself if we give it half a chance. You can find out a lot more about studies of conditions and trends in the Clark Fork and the actions that are being taken and evaluations of those actions by attending as much of the symposium tomorrow as you can, because that's exactly what all those presentations are about. I assume you've all got the program there in front of you. Here's tonight's program, which you've already heard about. Tomorrow, we start out in the morning in the Upper Clark Fork in this room, and that Upper Clark Fork session goes the whole morning up till noon. Starting at the 10 a.m. break, we had so many papers that we're going to start a couple of concurrent sessions at that time. So at that time, everybody can come and hear the first part of the Upper Clark Fork session, but when it comes to the second part of the Upper Clark Fork session, you'll have to choose between it and going to these fisheries talks or these watershed conservation planning talks. And they're all good, I assure you. Then at noon, we'll have lunch. Those of you who paid and are registered, you are welcome to the wonderful sandwiches that we put out. The rest of you, we encourage, if you're here on the low-income freebie approach, we encourage you to eat downstairs instead. We have this poster session from 1 to 3 in a couple of rooms down on that side of the building. And then we have this wonderful session 4 of 3 really excellent talks, 20 years of water quality trends in the Clark Fork Ponderay watershed, and a water quality modeling talk, using that information in modeling, and a great talk on the restoration of German Gulch Creek and a vision for fisheries restoration in the Silver Bow Creek watershed. I want to mention that one in particular because isn't it great that we're talking about restoring the fishery in Silver Bow Creek, a stream that has been considered dead for so long. There's also a great workshop offered by Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology on how to obtain groundwater information through their Groundwater Information Center. And sorry, the Montana Water Trust workshop is not going to happen. And a great finish to the day would be to go over to the Montana Natural History Centers, having a great program with food and art, and you'll get a chance to see their new location on the Clark Fork. And they're even providing a shuttle bus from the symposium for those. It's a great way to go get supper. You can go have dinner over there for not very much money, and you'll be supporting the Natural History Center. And then on Saturday is this tour of Missoula Urban Creek projects. And if you would like to do that, go on that tour, just sign up at the registration desk at some point. So, I'm going way over time, but I'm going to, and I think we might encourage people to save their questions till the end so that we can move on to the next one. And I'm going to start loading the next speaker's talk, and she's going to come up.
My name is Chris Brick, and I am talking tonight about a State of the Clark Fork report that I put together with my colleagues at the Coalition, with Tracy Stone Manning and also with Karen Knudsen. And I also have to mention Rankin Holmes, who is from the Big Sky Conservation Institute, who put together he did all of our GIS mapping and put together the maps that are in this talk and in the report. So we put together this report with the goal of taking stock of the watershed by looking through really 3 different lenses. The idea was that by putting together bits of data and charts and maps, we wanted to take sort of a collective look in the mirror. In other words, we wanted to ask ourselves where we are, how we're doing, and hopefully to try to assess where we're going. So we wanted to look at both economic, social, and environmental indicators. Well, the population story in the basin is not news probably to most of you. This is a map of population density, and we all, I think, also know that population growth is really a double-edged sword in the basin. It has provided more economic opportunity and more diversity, but also we get more traffic, more pollution, more people on the river, more crime, and loss of farmland and open space. It's also interesting to note, of course, that population growth doesn't occur evenly over the whole basin. Current population density, or actually not that current, but 5 years ago, and it hasn't changed that much, was concentrated in the Bitterroot Valley through Missoula and then up in the Flathead Valley. And so if you look at it by county, in this graph and the dates are 1979, 1989, and 1999, what you see is that the biggest growth is in Missoula and Flathead counties, and then also in Ravalli County, that's the blue line here. But there's, in fact, decreasing numbers of people in Silverbow County, which is the red line, and in Deer Lodge County, and that's the Anaconda area. That's this turquoise line down here. And the rural counties, Granite, Mineral, Powell, Sanders, really haven't seen that much in the way of population growth. It's also interesting to compare where new residents to Montana settle with sort of the location of natural amenities in the basin. We hear from the economists all the time that it's natural amenities that bring people here. And so the percentages are probably not visible, but the dark colors here are high percentages. That dark brown is 29 to 30% of people in the year 2000 who lived somewhere else in some other state in 1995. So what you see is that large numbers of people moved here to the Bitterroot Valley and to the area around Flathead Lake, and also to Mineral County here. Up to 20% of the population are newcomers. And if you compare that, say, to a map of land ownership within the Clark Fork Basin, what you see is that those are areas that have a lot of natural forests, they have parks, wilderness areas. Those are the parts of the basin where there's a lot of open space and opportunities for recreation or simply for a nice place to live. So, and economically, this growth has certainly had some positive effects, although not everywhere. Of course, what you notice is that the graph here is per capita income, adjusted for inflation for 1980, 1990, and 2000. And what you see are large increases in the counties that have more, the larger towns. I'm not sure, I don't know if we'd exactly call them urban, but Missoula County, Flathead County, and Silverbow County. And there's a big separation here between those counties and between the rural counties. You also notice large increases in per capita income, interestingly enough, in Ravalli County and in Deer Lodge County. That's not to say there's no poverty within the basin. Certainly there are pockets of it in both rural and urban areas. And the map, again, the dark brown is on the order of 26 to 44% of the population with income below the poverty level. And the medium brown there is 19 to 25%. So that's a large percentage of the population in those areas with relatively low incomes. It's also interesting to note that a larger percentage of our income now comes from things like dividends and interest, and transfer payments, in other words, like retirement money, and less from labor. In fact, between 1970 and 2000, the percentage of income basin-wide from labor, from just regular jobs, decreased from 62% of the total to 53% of the total. So we're definitely seeing more, an older population in the basin, more people with retirement income. And of course, the age structure in the basin also bears that out. Okay, so everybody wants to know, where are the jobs? The new jobs in the basin are primarily in services, especially in the more urban counties, and I put in one graph here of Flathead County as sort of an example, but Lake, Missoula, and Ravalli counties look basically the same with the jobs. This is jobs along, thousands of jobs along the y-axis there, and there are various categories sort of stayed steady for the most part in most of the counties, but we saw this huge increase in service jobs. So should we be worried? Are we turning into a basin of burger flippers? The question really is, what is, a lot of people hear the word services and wonder, well, what is that category exactly? And this chart over here shows that services actually are primarily the largest percent of the services job, in other words, the largest percent of this big increase has been in health, legal, business, engineering, and management type jobs. The second biggest increase has been in retail trade. And then the third biggest increase, not in the services category, but in the other categories, has been in construction. And in Flathead County, you can see that little blip in the green line here, which are construction jobs. And that holds up in a number of other counties as well. So this is what it looks like for the more urban counties, but it's kind of a different story in the rural counties. I put just two counties up here, Mineral County and Deer Lodge County, as examples. And what you see is that these counties had far greater reliance to begin with on some of Montana's, what we think of as Montana's traditional industries, forest products and agriculture and mining. And these industries have taken big hits in the last 30 years. The service, you notice that the services and professional category is still provides the most jobs. And again, for the most part, those are professional jobs, but in Mineral County, it's actually, those are more retail trade jobs than professional jobs, so that's one exception. But you can see the purple line, which is manufacturing, and that includes forest products, taking a big hit in Deer Lodge County. That's probably closing of the Anaconda smelter. The graph is similar in Butte in the Silver Bow County graph. And also a gradual sort of decline of that industry in Mineral County. It's also interesting to note that among the top 3 employers, if you look at the top 3 job categories between 1970 and 2000, in 1970 it was agriculture and government were 2 of the top employers. Government has also decreased substantially as a major employer in the basin. And so that has been really replaced by, as I said before, health, legal, business and engineering jobs, retail trade, and construction. So taking a closer look at the timber industry, the timber industry's gone through a lot. It's, this is million board feet per county through a number of years. It starts in 1976 and goes up to 1998. Doesn't include all the years, but sort of the major ones. And you can see big percentage declines in the timber industry in Flathead, Mineral, Ravalli, and Sanders County. Those are the counties that tend to have more public land. Actually, though, if you look at Deer Lodge, Granite, Lake, and Missoula County, the timber harvest is actually at near historic levels, most likely owing to a higher percentage of private timberland in those counties. And in the 30 years, the timber industry has really undergone both record high and record low prices, and structural changes within the industry as well. So a few more economic indicators. Small businesses are really the big economic story in the basin. 82% of our businesses in the watershed employ less than 10 people. Ravalli County actually leads the pack. This is Ravalli County with 38, with a growth of 38%. So between 1993 and 2001. And so you can see that, well, what are the counties that are doing well here? Ravalli County, Sanders County, Flathead County. Here's Ravalli, Sanders, Flathead. And Deer Lodge County and Silver Bow County somehow aren't getting there. I mean, small businesses seem to be sort of economically the driving force in many of these counties, and in Montana as a whole, but that's not happening in Deer Lodge and in Silver Bow counties, basically in the upper basin. The unemployment rate here is unemployment rates have mostly declined between 1979, 1989, and 1999, with the exception of Deer Lodge County and Silver Bow County. That's the turquoise line and the red line, where unemployment originally rose and then had tapered off between 1989 and 1999, although that probably doesn't tell the whole story because a lot of people actually moved away from those counties, so it's not, people who were unemployed simply left. So good news and bad news, houses are becoming a little bit less affordable. This is a chart of the total number of new houses built between 1990 and 2000. Flathead and Missoula County, followed by Ravalli County, have the highest numbers of new houses. And this chart over here is sort of it's an index of affordability. And really what you need to know about the index is that this green line, if you get on this side of the green line, you're getting, that on the left side of that green line, the average home or the median house is not affordable to the median family. So what you can see is that Ravalli County is approaching that line, Lake County is approaching that line, and Missoula County's getting there. Flathead County also is approaching that line. And houses have become between, the yellow bar is 1990, the brown bar is 2000, so in most cases, houses have become slightly less affordable throughout that time period. Well, not surprisingly, social indicators tend to follow the economic indicators. If we look at percentages of children in single-parent households, domestic abuse and family offenses, births to teenage mothers, we tend to find Silver County in sort of the above average category for all of those within the counties. If you would just compare the counties in the basin, and in some cases here I've also got the Montana averages listed. So, where we see economic hardships in Silver Bow and Deer Lodge County, we also, not too surprisingly, see hardships for families. So how do environmental indicators tie in? Well, in general, kind of going back to where we started in this talk, the areas containing the highest proportion of protected lands are also some of the areas that have seen the highest rates of population growth and can claim the most robust economic indicators. And this shows a chart of total protected area by watershed. And so you can see there's large percentages of protected area. That means conservation easements, that's the yellow part of the bar, and wilderness and natural research natural areas, the brown part of the bar. So in the Blackfoot and in the Bitterroot and the Flathead, and certainly the Bitterroot and the Flathead are where people have settled within the basin. Missoula kind of falls right in the middle of watershed, so it's hard to see, Missoula in this chart, but it's probably reflected somewhat in the Blackfoot. But meanwhile, we have problems of the past that we need to continue cleaning up, and I'm just going to flip through a few environmental indicators that we looked at. This is a map of abandoned and inactive mines in the basin, where the green dots are all abandoned and inactive, and the red dots are the priority abandoned mines. So those are the ones that tend to have more, they're contributing more to pollution or to human health concerns in the basin. And there's a lot of them. There's an impressive number in the upper basin. And then of course, partly because of this, the upper basin is a Superfund site from Butte down to Milltown. Dams by height in the basin. The green dots are generally low dams, 0 to 1 to say 16 feet. There are very few large dams. There's the one, of course, by Hungry Horse. And these aren't all, problems everywhere, but there are problems that perhaps we can mitigate, in terms of arranging, or modifying them for fish passage. And we need to work towards solving current and evolving problems that are caused by growth. One of these problems is, potentially dewatering of the basin, and that's just going to get worse. This is data from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks showing the miles of dewatered stream in the different sub-basins of the Clark Fork. The upper Clark Fork is definitely problematic, but so is the Blackfoot. Another problem, actually, as Vicki described earlier, was cumulative nutrient impact to streams and lakes. And we need to continue to protect the amenities that make this place what it is. And this is a graphic from the Montana Wilderness Association that shows the percentage of roadless land in 1940, 1975, and 1999. And the dark green is Forest Service land that's unroaded. The light green is Forest Service land that is roaded. And so you can see the change from, lots of dark green here to lots of light green over here. And the yellow is wilderness area, so there has also been an increase in wilderness, but a huge change in between in the wildlands, which are part of the amenities really that fuel our growth in the basin. So, as we've seen, for some communities in the basin, the main underlying social factors really are outmigration and diminished economic opportunities, and especially that's true in the upper basin and in some of our rural counties. But in other parts of the basin, namely Missoula County, Ravalli County, and Flathead County, the problem is more one of rampant growth, and that can, of course, stress community infrastructure. Basin-wide, people can work to fill these gaps by encouraging creation of new jobs that support healthy and vibrant communities, jobs that recognize the economic worth of the basin's natural assets, and jobs that hopefully retain the quality of life that bind us to our communities and to our surrounding lands. And so I guess at the coalition, we're coming to this realization that environmental health and community health are inextricably linked, and we need to work for ways to just sustain both of them. That's it.